Alright, hello everyone. So we're on, this is video number 2. This is going to be mostly covering how the enemies work and certain variables like heat and basic combat functionality. So as you see, this is a mess. Unfortunately, it's kind of how it is. It's how Fusion works. Everything that's supposed to be in the scene needs to be in the scene at the start. So I have a whole bunch of stuff just kind of off to the side. Honestly, all the characters up here is mostly an aesthetic thing for me. I don't really know why I want them here, but I don't need to actually have them here. They can be off to the side as well. But as soon as the game starts, it basically wipes everyone out. So that way, you actually do get a blank slate. You can see that code here. To have nice destroys of actions on everything. But anyway, so let me go over how I program the enemies, because the brilliant thing that I thought was brilliant was I knew I was going to have a lot of enemy types in this game, and I didn't want to have constantly having to reprogram each and every single one of them. So I tried to come up with a system where I can kind of use one set of code for everybody. There's some going to be, of course, certain alterations for certain individuals, but overall there's be some overlap in terms of like attacks and like registering hitboxes and things like that. So for every single enemy, and the first enemy of the game is the Balrog, even more than the Beowulf. This guy here. So literally every single enemy is technically a clone of the Balrog. So in the object, here's all my animations for it, and I'm gonna keep these names because these names will keep coming up. We have there's a stopped animation, a walking animation. Then I have 2 slashes, a /1, a /2, idle, fireball, block, tail swipe, stun, of course your death, you're frozen. Then I have a bunch here that you see I don't actually have animations for, but I have them here, and there's a reason why I'm keeping them here. I need them to be a placeholder. But there's dig, attack. These are used for... These were named specifically for that little slug grim, which has a dig attack. But in order to reuse certain animations and certain code, like there's a dig attack for like Cinder, but it doesn't actually dig. That's her kick. So I do reuse some of these, specifically because that way, whatever, I only have to register one type of collision instead of having to register a kick and a dig. I reuse code that way, and I'll get more into that in a bit. So dodge, he doesn't have a dodge, but I need to have the placeholder there. And then gravity, which is unfortunately not used yet, but I have the groundwork in here for gravity dust to, as you see, kind of hold them in place. So hopefully I'll get that in there soon. So we went over the animations. With every single enemy, we have the same set of variables. And there's 2 types of variables. Well, there's 3. I don't use strings, but in my game I use 2. There's 2 types of variables. There's flags, which is just an on or off, so that's your Boolean values. And then you have your typical alter values, which are all integer values. Fusion has the ability for strings. Like I said, I don't use them for anything, particularly in my project, but just so you know that Fusion does have that. With Fusion, variables, you can name them, but internally it doesn't actually use it. Everything's based on a number, so when you create these variables, they're all actually a letter. They're just alter value A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The naming is just strictly for you to visually see it, but under the hood, it's just A, B, C, D. And the same thing goes with the animations, which is why I have those placeholders for the Balrog, like the dig, because in the code, it's referencing animation A internally, but animation A, for the sake of reusing the code, I have to make sure that everyone shares the same exact internal value as the external value. So I can't take an animation that's A for one enemy and B for another enemy and name them the same and it works. It won't work. So that's kind of why I had to have those placeholders. And the same goes for the values. So I have to have this exact list in this exact order. So whether I use these values or not. But let's run down what each one does. You have, of course, your health, how long the enemy lasts. You have your armor. Armor is typically one for almost everybody. Armor is, if you notice, some enemies can block, and that while they're currently blocking, their armor goes up, doubles. And that's basically what I control. Some enemies, such as the Paladin, has, I believe, a higher value armor. Oh, I'm not getting the Paladin. Okay, there. Yeah, see, the armor is 2. It's a percentage base, so it's not necessarily subtracting 1. It's actually based on the percent, and we'll go over that code hopefully soon. Alright, so then we have 2 other here, status effects and status effect duration. So when you have certain dust attacks, both from Weiss and RWBY have a property to it. So you have your fire dust, you have your electric dust, and you have your ice dust currently. Maybe in the future, gravity dust and earth dust, maybe hard light. But the 3 that are in the game that can have a status effect. It has a random chance that the enemy gets inflicted with that status effect. This is what will, if this is more than 1, it has that effect. So let's say you hit the Balrog with ice, it has a 30% chance. It triggers, then they get a status effect of 3, I believe, which tells it that you're frozen, and then it sets this duration to a value. In this case, let's say 100, and that'll be how long it will last for. It'll start counting down, and once it runs out, then it's free from that status effect. That's what those variables control. AI action, just like Weiss, it controls their AI functionality. Theirs work differently than Weiss, Yang, and Blake in terms of they don't have the crosshair, because typically speaking, you only have 2 allies on this. You only have yourself and an ally on the screen, and honestly, they're basically all programmed to go after RWBY. The only exception is that if the partner character is close enough to them, or in certain cases of like certain attacks, they will respond to that, and then we'll fight them if they're close enough to them. Or if RWBY's incapacitated, then they'll start focusing on it. But typically speaking, they tend to go after RWBY more, because that's the player character. That's the one who I need to challenge. So I don't need to have this crosshair. Direction, exactly the same as the other NPCs, just controls what direction. Typically speaking, Fusion has built-in control for direction. You can literally go in here and in your animation, you see you have direction options, left, right. Because my game uses raster images, meaning every single frame I need to have in this engine. So I'm not using like Unity having a sort of like basically almost like a 3D model, but using flat images attached to a armature or a bone structure. I don't have access to doing that, so I have to render these out, each individual frames, and some of them for like bosses get quite big. Like this boss here is 600 by 500, 577. So it's quite a big size, and it adds up, especially when you're like RWBY has over 1,000 frames of animation, and she's going to get more because she's going to have at least another 4 more modules to Crescent Rose, so it's going to grow quite a bit. And in order to save space, because I don't know if this is true, but I believe there is a space limitation, like how big your game can be on Fusion. I don't want to hit that limit at a really inopportune time, so what I did, there's only one direction. I don't have anything for, as you see, I don't have anything for the left-hand side. I only have it on the right. And with a shader, I flip the image when that variable that I call direction is equal to 1. It flips it dynamically. So that saves a ton of space by having to do it that way. And if you ever wondered why I'm hesitant to add things like costumes and stuff like that to the game itself, trust me, I really want them. I love that in games, but I am nervous about hitting that cap. If there is a cap, maybe there isn't a cap, and I'm just going crazy. But I swear I had this problem with Synthetic Onslaught where I had so many frames where the game just was unplayable, and it wasn't like lag. It was like just code just didn't run. Like, just blocks code just didn't happen. It just, a bullet will go right through the enemy without causing damage, and it didn't seem to get better until I started cutting out frames. So I don't know how true it is. I don't, like I said, maybe there's something else to it, but to prevent that from happening with this game, that's what I did. So that's what direction's for. Random gen is that little variable that controls like whether it does X or Y in a certain situation. It's just, and it varies for each one in each situation. I basically just throw up a number usually between like 3 and 10. It randomizes a number between there, and whichever one it comes up, it does an action if it's above or below whatever I have set in the if statement. Heat was that thing I told you about before. It starts at 0 and then climbs up. In the case of the enemies, they have a heat max, and it tells them how much heat they're able to take. Not all, and heat isn't just based on your attack damage. Every single attack that you do, Weiss does, Blake, Yang, maybe Penny when Penny comes into the game or not. I would like her to, but we'll see. Every single attack that they do has actually 2 properties. They have the raw damage, depending on the attack type, but they also have a heat damage. So that way you have attacks like your counter attack. Like RWBY has a nice little parry attack where she just quickly kicks the enemy. And she also has a counter attack where she just swats him with the butt of Crescent Rose. And that doesn't really do a lot of damage, but it does a lot of heat damage. Usually 1 hit to stagger the enemy. And that's kind of how I control that. So, since this is a boss that has relatively high heat, 50, and then every time it takes hits, it will go up by the heat damage it takes, and then when it hits 50, then it staggers. Then when it's done staggering with that animation, then it jumps back down to 0, and then rinse and repeat. Strength, basically just straight up, this is the damage it does when it has certain attacks. As you saw, as I mentioned, and I'll bring it up here again, but you see some of the same animation names again, /1, /2, idle, fireball, and there's no, if you played this boss, there's no fireballs. It does have a projectile attack, and I usually use that to do projectiles. But the reason I do that is that with the core mechanics of the game, having this little mechanic when you guard while enemies are doing certain actions, RWBY does a different action. So in this case, if you press down while the enemy is doing a fireball attack, she would immediately spin Crescent Rose to deflect the projectile that is launching at her. That's how I'm able to do that across the board and not have to create a rule set for every single enemy. So the general rule is anyone have an attack, a long range attack, fireball is where it goes. There's some enemies that have multiple types of those, and then I'll use other ones for that, but fireball is exclusively for that. /1 and /2. /1 is exclusively for a light attack. Those are usually that have a longer warm-up, less damage. Also, if the attack happens where it matters which direction they're facing, because there's some attacks that are like an AoE where it doesn't matter if they're facing or facing away from you, you're going to get hit, like the tail swipe. And /1 is definitely dependent on it. So if you're behind them and they do a /1 attack, you're not going to take damage from it. /2 is the same, and this one varies a little bit. It's strictly more for using the specific frame. So of course you have an attack animation here. I'm going to use this one for now. Obviously the enemy's not attacking in frame 3, so I don't want frame 3 to register. But the moment of impact, which is frame 10, I want that to be the moment. So tail swipe is always set to be frame 10. Frame 10 is what triggers the hit. This is using Balrog to physically do his tail spin, and that way I can keep one set of code for both these instances because they have the exact same frame that registers the hit, and they both are an AoE attack. So you can be behind the bug because you're getting hit by the wing. Does that make sense? But yeah, this is, so you see the same repeat. They have digs, but there's no actual animation here. Dodge is one that is used a lot too. That's how I handle invincibility frames on certain enemies. Definitely all the major enemies, Hence these guys here all have dodge attacks because I want to give them the ability to avoid damage, and so on and so forth. So back to the variables. No, I need to get back to here. So when frame 10 of Tail Swipe happens, there's code that gives it a base damage, and then it adds this strength modifier to it. So that way, getting a Tail Swipe from, a Beowulf is not the same as getting a Tail Swipe from a Balrog or a large Deathstalker. That's how I control that damage changing. Move speed, that's pretty obvious. That's how many everything's based on XY grid, so how much the enemy moves while performing their walking animation. So then we got these multipliers here. So there is mechanics, and I apologize that it's not the most visible, but there is damage modifiers where, especially with RWBY, but you also see this with the other characters too, but you don't see it, but it's there, where they can either have a normal attack, a piercing attack, power attack, and then you have your bullets and your dust. So ice, light, gravity, which is not used, and fire. So there's different enemies that tends to be where enemies with armor tends to be more susceptible to piercing and maybe power. There are some enemies that are resistant to power even though they have armor. Different kind of things. And unfortunately, you kind of just have to memorize which one does. I mean, I try to make it make sense. RWBY has an animation where she uses it like a lance. Crescent Rhodes, where she picks up the blade. I think that's... No. Not that one. Like that. So this would be a piercing attack. Heavy 5 is a piercing attack because see it's doing the same thing straight down. That would be considered a piercing attack. Heavy attacks would be... Power attacks, I'm sorry. Would be a lot of these heavy ones. So like this little swing down. Any of her axe modifier or power. And then normal is going to be like your typical slashes. So her light slashes here. These are all considered normal. And these are generally better against smaller enemies and not that effective against more armored enemies. Kind of makes sense. Her semblance attack is considered power. These little... And then, of course, the big semblance attack, if I can find it. Here. This one here. This is also considered a power attack. So keep that in mind. But yeah, this is where I control all that. So, excuse me. I don't have the right person selected. Okay, I got the Nevermore. So yeah, this is a multiplier. If it's 100, that means it does straight damage at 100%. So these are all percentage values. Power looks like the Nevermore is resistant to power a little bit, just by a little. And then everything else is pretty standardized going across. But then maybe an enemy like the Balrog see, it takes double damage from ice attacks, from ice dust attacks, and it's half damage from bullet and fire and piercing. It's slightly resistant to power, but it's mostly normal attacks that are effective against the Balrog. But you really want to take them out, hit them with some ice. The AK-150 being a robot, of course, the obligatory all dust attacks actually hurt them. I forgot. So yeah, that and the Paladin, both all dust attacks are effective. And they're resistant to normal, but you can hurt them with bullets. And the Lancers are actually resistant to almost everything except dust and bullet attacks. And there's a whole thing, and you can read up more of that in the Grim Note section of the game. Alright. And of course, like I said, gravity is not in the game, so that's not used. So I'd mentioned that I had code in the object itself. Let's go over that. It's pretty much like Weiss's. Basically, you have this controls if there needs to be a movement for an animation, that's what controls this. And then the AI, I stated here, like this is code specifically if it's touching Weiss, meaning she's in range, then I'll try to do an attack on her. But most of them here are just straight up, where's Ruby's position? Depending on you, get closer to Ruby if you're too far, or in certain cases, if she's too close, get some distance, like the White Fang and Roman both have code that they're both tended to be range fighters, so they're both coded that if you get too close to try to run away, get some distance and engage range combat. Fun. Of course, here's specific code that if it's overlapping Yang to engage, fight her. And then here's like what I was saying, there's some code that if Yang's doing a light attack, then try to dodge it, which is this AI action 10 is dodge. It has no block, but if it had a block, there'll be coding to do that. That's basically it with that. So I'm going to... Okay. So we're going to add a new enemy. So I went ahead and I just cloned the Geist because that's going to be the most similar to what I'm going to be adding. But if you've been up to date, I have a nice new enemy. It's going to be the Apathy. So let's go add. First thing first, we need to update the animations. Obviously, this is not Apathy. So I'm going to go in here and go bring up my animations, which is in here. So when I render these out, I render these out with using Max's automatic file names per frame. So it's all based on a frame. I tried to break them up where one animation ends and there'll be a little break in between. So that way, because you can import animations based on a number value. So I can import, I believe 01 is walking. So I want to find the standing animation, which is this one. Let's say go 13 to 15. It means it's 15 here. It's the start of a new one. And this is the standing. So Fusion gives me the ability to, don't want to keep original hotspots, import as animation, replace current animation, and it counts from that point. So there's the next break is in 11 frames, so it assumes that these 11 are together. There we go, got our Apathy animation. Maybe speed that up a little. Oops. So walking, I think, is this animation. I'm going to do the same thing. It's going to be interesting because I deliberately gave it a broken animation. So like the one leg doesn't really work. So it's going to be interesting moving this guy around because it's not going to be normal. /1. They'll have, so Apathy typically in the show didn't really attack, but because it's kind of a game, I kind of need to give them a generic attack. That's kind of what a brawler is about. They'll have just a standard light attack, but we're going to add functionalities to give them something special. So they function more like they do in the show, but we'll give them this little basic attack just to have one. It's a simple hand swipe. It won't be that fast though, I want it to be a little slow. There you go. Stun is that basically a stagger animation. So I'm going to have to find that in here. There, looks like that's it. Nope, that's something else. That one. Okay, so where does that start? 16, 7, 5, 4. Okay, so there's no 4. So it starts here. Next one's going to have a loop. So 4, I think, as well. Oh, so I have an extra frame I didn't want. Of course, good old death. We're out to kill these Grims, so they need to have that. That's it. I can start at 75. Whoa, that was weird. Okay, so we're going to loop back to 11. Simple enough. Frozen is usually just a frame from stun that I just do one frame of. Interesting. That's technically a bug because they're not supposed to have that. Oh, anyway, they're supposed to have just one. Very interesting. I think I coded a little special thing that the Geist cannot be frozen. I think that's why it's done like that. And I didn't actually need that animation. So it's 10 frames. Stays frozen for. Dig return. Okay, so that's its reappearing animation. And then it has a dodge, which we're not going to use. Clear that. This one I will use though. So most enemies come from either the left-hand side of the stage or the right-hand side of the stage, but there's a couple of rare instances where I have enemies that can spawn elsewhere in the middle, and I had to give them a special animation to explain how they just appear. In this case, Geist can appear in the middle and they have little like spin-in animation. And I have one for Apathy to come out of the ground like a zombie. I'm going to find it here. That's death. Okay, so this one, and it starts at 88. That was a little fast. There you go. That's it appearing. Maybe 15. Nope, too slow. Oh, that's why, because that's 1. So that'll be its appearing animation, and then gravity. I don't really have one for gravity, so I'm going to just copy stun. Alrighty, there's Apathy. I didn't really go with the full size. The show doesn't really make sizes don't really make sense. Like they looked to me in Volume 6, they looked a little similar. Or was it Volume 5? I can't remember, but they looked pretty similar in terms of just size comparison. But in Arrowfell, they tower over Team RWBY, so I'm not 100% sure. So I kind of went a little middle ground where they're taller than the average human, but not like giants. Okay, so now let's go into the logic here. So now because I have my naming convention, I should be able to just plop one here and just set some variables, and we might be able to have some sort of action. So Apathies tend to be very tanky, so give them 200. I think I'm going to give them pretty high heat resistance. Move speed is atrocious. Give them 5. Does it have high damage? Let's give them... I don't think I'm going to really make... Well, maybe it should. They're tanky. Here, power attacks work really well. So your semblance will work really well with it. Okay, so I think they're resistant to bullets, if I remember right. So let's give 50. They ended up killing them with fire, so I think I'm going to keep their weakness to fire. I'll keep them. Light. Oh, hard light. Yeah, we're not using hard light, but I guess we'll keep it where physical bullets don't do much damage, but dust does. I think that's fair. Now, with everything set the way it is, I'm actually able to just jump in, and it kind of sort of works. It may not be the exact result I want. Just give it a minute to compile. If you kind of walk. Oh, that goes right through him. Interesting. Interesting. That's broken. Let's see what's going on there. I think the animation never ended. You know what? It's probably doing actions that I deleted. So let's go and change the code. But you saw that I had, just off the bat, it kind of worked. And that's because back in the scene properties, I keep these. So let me quickly go over something which I should have covered before. But in Fusion, we have this little thing called qualifiers. These are basically a group. So you can group, if you're used to programming, this is basically you're assigning a class. And you see, there's an enemy class here. And in the code for, I have AI, I also have like dodges, and I have damage. You see, I go by the group enemies. So any enemy that has the animation 12, which is that tail swipe. Remember I said that before, they're based on a number, so this is animation 12. I know that from experience that that's the where the 12th position is. And then the current frame 10, as I said, that's when it calculates the damage. So if it had a tail swipe attack, it would automatically know what to do just straight off the bat. And as you saw there, it just kind of knew and went with it. So let's go make the tweaks we need to tweak. So go into its behavior, go into its AI. So first things first, it has code in there to teleport, which it doesn't do anymore. So let's get rid of that. Let's go, I think movement has... Let's find out what's the AI action. I think this one. So we want to remove AI action 10 and 11 because we're not using those. Actually, we'll use 11. That would be its spawning in the middle of the map animation. Those are going to be controlled externally. When I create them, I'll just set it specifically there to let it know to use those. But now I'm going to look in the code here for what triggers it to have AI action 10 in the AI. Here. So we don't want any of this code. We'll just deactivate it for now. Okay. So that part's working. Now I want to fix that walking animation. This is going to be fun. So it walks with one leg. So up to frame 7, it actually moves forward, and it'll probably be relatively stationary after frame 7. So let's go into movement and find its moving animation. So AI action, that's movement. So that's here. So we're going to go in here and add a condition. We're going to go in if apathy animation current frame is lower or equal to 7. Now it should only move when that leg is moving. Now I might need to go in and make it move a little bit with the other one, if I remember right, but we'll start there. So let's let it compile. Still moves kind of fast. Kind of gets hung up after the attack. I need to figure out why. Hello. We gotta look into that too. Let's see. Trying to see if that makes sense. Oh, that's right. I also gotta get rid of Blake and Yang. It doesn't actually block anything or dodge anything. I gotta find Weiss. Oh, Weiss is already disabled. Good. I'm trying to figure out why it hangs after attacking. Have /1 is over. That's this one. I don't need that code. So I did seem to need a little bit of movement. So let's paste that here. If it's greater than 7. Here I'm going to hard code it. I'm going to just move 1 pixel. I think it's a very slight thing, so I think 1 pixel is effective. And also, he moves still pretty fast, so let's do 3. There you go. There we go. There we go. It certainly seems to get hung up after the heat wears off. Okay. Well, we're getting somewhere. So let's see if I can figure out why. Because I don't have a... Stun is over? Oh, because it tries to do that. We don't want it to teleport. We want him... That's what it is. Probably need to up his their tanking net too. Okay, he can't hit me from there, but can you hit me here? There you go. Ah, I'm off with the animation. So you see, she takes damage afterwards. So let me fix that. So all I need to do is go into the slash animation, add some frames. Let's add some here. There we go. Hit me. Hit me. What happened? Okay, so let's go. So in the show, I'm going to leave that for now. I'll fix that over time, but you get the general idea. But in the show, apathies typically don't necessarily attack, but what they do is they kind of just suck the will to live out of Team RWBY and Crow and Oscar and whoever else was there. I can't fully remember. Not really Maria. She seemed pretty immune to them, which is a little weird. They never explain why, but it is what it is. But anyways, So I want to create something like that. The whole reason about the apathy in the game was not to have like a dumb zombie, but to actually have a mechanic like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some code in here. I'm trying to think of the best place to put this. I guess movement, where if apathy is more than 1, so that'd be pick or count compared to some apathy objects. It's greater than 0. Not greater than 1, greater than 0. And then it's going to be every second. We're going to go into, and we're going to drain everybody's energy. So we're going to go into RWBY, energy points, subtract. I might even up that. I think this could be, let's make this interesting. So even a fraction of a second. Now it's not directly deducting their aura, but it's deducting their energy. Now if you remember, I had an update where if the energy is not enough and there's a deficit, then it starts pulling from your aura, so eventually it will start to. So I think that'd be kind of interesting, kind of puts a little urgency into dealing with them. Oops. We want it on Blake and Yang. We want the same thing for Weiss. Where is she? She's right here. So now, see, her energy is slowly dropping, quite frantically, actually. Maybe a little too much. And now that it's gone, her energy starts to restore. Okay, let's do that again. I'm curious if my code works, it should also automatically start deducting your aura. And then once that's done, then I'll increase it because that's a little too much. Ow, not what I wanted to test. Nope. Now our aura is starting to drop. So yeah, that's basically the mechanic I wanted to do. And I'm going to tweak it a bit because that's a little too extreme. I don't know, I feel like 1 second is too much, but let's see. But the other thing I wanted to add in here too is, I mean, technically speaking, having their presence does kind of let the world live no matter what they're doing. But in terms of gameplay, when you stagger an opponent, you really shouldn't be affected by anything by them. When they're staggered, they're basically useless. So I'm going to add a condition in here that which animation is playing and their stun, negate. And if they're doing their dying animation, we don't want that to also be affecting because they're dead. We don't want it to have them while they're frozen. And we don't want it to have them while they're gravity, but I'm not really using that yet, but you get the idea. And then dig return is that little appearing animation. Obviously, they would affect them, but because I need to give the player a chance to really deal with it. That's kind of how it needs to work. Now, I did make one mathematical mistake where the way this code is working right now is if there's any more than one, deduct. But what if there's like 20? And I kind of feel like if there's more than one on the screen, the effect should be greater. So let's go in and change the code. Let's go in and change this. From this, we're going to actually go into here, and where's my pick or count? Count number of objects. So now it's going to subtract the amount of apathies from that amount. So if you have 3, it's going to subtract 3. If you have 2, subtract 2. If you have 200, subtract 200. So let's go test this. And I'm going to add a little debug code here. I'll take it off later, but I'm just going to do it something quick. Keyboard, I'm not pressing a key. Upon pressing, shoot, what key should I use? C, okay. So we're going to create more apathies. When I press Z. Easy, I'm going to spawn where he is and just actual XY coordinates, so they'll spawn the exact same spot. Here, so now let's go test that little intro animation. So we go into apathy. When I create them, that's White Fang. Alter variables, we're going to set, set its AI action to 11. And you know what, since I'm here, we can randomize this position. We're going to set it to a random X position. The screen size is 1280, so all I need to do is random 1280. Really speaking, I wouldn't normally do it that way. I would kind of do like a 640 and then like multiply it by something, but just so that way it won't like randomize one in 1180 and then 1181. But for testing purposes, it's fine. Okay, so if you see, it's nowhere near the effect as before. Now let's add more. Nice. And as you see, my count is dropping quite significantly. Now there's 3. Add more. Okay, this is not good for me. Yeah. As you see, it's plummeting quite dramatically. I don't know why this first guy didn't work, but I'm gonna fix that. And there you go. That's pretty cool. Now, of course, I'm going to go back and tweak and test and do a lot of other things because, you know, it's not perfect. But me having the code the way it is, and this is exactly what I wanted, was I can add enemies fairly easily. When it comes to adding characters, it's a lot more involved because there's a lot more code that is manually tied specifically to Yang, Weiss. Because if you notice in the game, they actually function very differently. It's like Yang is a tank, and she's literally programmed to be a tank. She doesn't dodge all that much, and her only dodge she has is a quick back step, which she doesn't even really move. She basically just takes a step back and then leans back forward to counterattack. And then she mostly guards. And Weiss is very agile. She's constantly moving. She has she dodges either with a dash attack, she can backflip, she can take a back step, and she can even counterattack with a dash attack. And then Blake is more like Weiss, where she's more dodge based, but she has her semblance, where she uses her semblance to physically teleport herself, leaving a clone behind, as well as having a dash behind, and then even an attack using her ribbons, where she jumps back and throws her ribbons, so it's kind of like a parry / counterattack / dodge attack. So in order for me to pull that off, they were so varying between them, I couldn't really come up with a system where I can kind of keep it uniform. So to help the initial creation of them, I had to do it this way, but it does make it very difficult and a lot more involved to add characters. So I wasn't planning on adding a lot more characters, but we'll see. We'll never know. But I think that's a good stopping point now. So hopefully I give you an insight of my development process, and let me know if you want to see any of this stuff, especially for any other games. And I hope you enjoy it. See you guys around.